Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Work at Home Rockstar podcast. Excited for today's guest. She is the CEO of Independent Podcast Network. She's a podcast coach and a mentor. And what she does is she helps podcasters successfully launch, grow, and monetize their shows. Very excited to be rocking out today with Sunny Gault. Sunny,
You
you
got
ready to
it. You
rock?
got it. I'm ready to rock.
I almost
Yes.
said the French thing again.
No, you did a great job.
Thank you. So we always start off here on a good note. So tell me a story of success in your business that we can be inspired by.
Oh my goodness. So, as you mentioned, I help podcasters launch and grow their shows. But before I really did that, I've been in podcasting for a long time. Before I did that, I was just a podcaster. And I say just a podcaster, but Tim, like that's a lot. Just to produce one show is a lot. One of the things that I'm really proud of, I think, is being able to have my work from home business kind of grow with my life and allow myself to be able to enjoy the things in life that are really important to me. And the first thing that I think of is my family. So I'm a mom. I've got 4 kids. I used to say little kids, but now they're in elementary school. So I don't know if you can really say, young kids at that point. But what I did was I was kind of in the stage of life where I was starting to have a family, and my background was in journalism and doing radio and TV and things like that. And I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted something that was a little bit more relaxed. And like I said, we wanted to start a family. And that was right when kind of podcasting and YouTube and things like that were becoming a thing. And I thought, well, I've got the skill set to be able to do that, right? I, was doing that, for TV stations and radio stations. And so starting my own business, and what that allowed me to do is be there for every step of the way with my kids. I never really had to have a babysitter unless my husband and I wanted a little bit of a break. We did do that occasionally. But, I hear horror stories, and I would do podcast episodes on this because the shows that I was doing was focused on parenting and pregnancy and things like that. And I would hear these horror stories about parents who had to leave their kids, had to go back to work, miss their kids' first steps, weren't able to do a lot of the things that, quite frankly, I kind of took for granted. If anything, I was like, get me out of the house. But it was still so important. And so when I look back on like their early days and growing up and stuff, I'm just so thankful that I had that. And I really do list that as one of my biggest accomplishments. Because for me, yes, you have to make money. Yes, that's kind of what makes the whole world go round. But for me, everything boils down to family. So if I were to, just kind of narrow it down to one thing, it's that independence that allowed me to be there when they were sick, and not having to call off work. I just maybe do my work at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever, just having that flexibility to be there for them. So that's my number one.
Wow. Yeah, congratulations on that. I mean, that's awesome. And I know for me as well, I had the same goal, and
Yeah.
I left my cubicle job when my son was 1 year old.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was pretty much the only dad showing up to all the parent teacher stuff
I love
at the
it.
time. But yeah, I mean, it was so much harder back then too. So it just keeps getting easier, don't you think?
Yes. And we keep getting smarter, at least hopefully. Entrepreneurs, you learn as you go. And sometimes that's the best education. It can be frustrating, as you know. But yeah, the technology is getting easier to get this stuff done. So that's helpful. When I started podcasting, we were still manually coding RSS feeds. So we don't have to do that anymore, right? And I'm not the techie you are
Wow.
necessarily. I have, I've been around equipment a lot, being in radio and TV. So I have to have some experience in that, but I consider myself more of a content person than a tech person. So some things are becoming easier, and I think we're just getting smarter too and learning how to use the platforms.
Yep, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are connecting with that why as well too. I think a lot of people nowadays want to be there for their children's first steps, whereas, especially men. I mean, especially
Mm.
like because back then, I know I don't think my dad was around. I can't imagine he was, because he was on the road all the time. So it's one
Yeah.
of those things that people are starting to really value that a lot more. And we do have now the tools and the ability to just work from home, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, growing up, I kind of had a similar situation. My mom, for several years, worked a regular job, and then my dad would work really late hours. A lot of times they had double jobs, and things like that. And so I was always so excited for my dad to come home from work. I would like run and jump in his arms, right? And I think that's just a testament to how much kids really, want to be with their parents as much as possible. And I know there's that, I've done episodes on this too, but that guilt feeling that, that parents have when they can't do that. So I don't want to spread more guilt or anything like that, but it's a really nice thing to be able to do if you can, and, not have those regrets moving forward.
Yeah. So now, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are
Oh,
some things that
no.
don't go as planned. I mean, and you've been doing this for a long time. So tell me something that didn't work out as planned, and let's just kind of
Oh,
normalize that a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. Well, there's so many things I could pull from, so many things. And I'm sure people have talked about just the inconsistency with like income sometimes coming in. I mean, it's really nice when, because I've done both, right? I've worked for TV stations where I show up and I get a paycheck, and that's just how it works. And I've got benefits and things like that. You don't, have all of that necessarily when you're working on your own. A lot of times the shows that I were producing were based on sponsorships. And this was like 10 years ago, when podcast sponsorships and advertising, like, it was few and far between. A lot more shows are making money now, but in the beginning, oh my goodness. I mean, my main way of finding that kind of revenue was going to trade shows that were specific. Again, I was talking about my shows. My original podcast that I launched were focused on pregnancy and parenting. And so I would go to baby and maternity trade shows, walk the floor with my demo in hand, because back then it was CDs pretty much. The mini USBs, were just coming out. So it was a lot of work to educate people about what a podcast was, and how does this whole thing work? And oh, now you're asking me for money to be on your show. What is all of this? So that was definitely a struggle. I think a lot of people would say that in the beginning, is how, I've learned multiple baskets of revenue and income. It has worked for me, right? So I try not to put all my eggs in one basket. Even in running my podcast, sometimes I do consulting work on the side. I do various things to try to make it work. But I think a lot of people would say that the income, one thing that might be a little bit different that I can bring to the table here, is I had an experience that really made me go, oh my gosh, do I really want to do this? Like, how committed am I to this? Because what happened was, this was regarding a sponsor for one of my shows. Okay. So this was specifically a show that we were producing about breastfeeding your babies. And I had a guest on the show through, actually, I wasn't the host of the show, but I was producing the show, and I own the rights to the show. And we were just starting to get into, revenue with advertising. And I was so excited. Oh my gosh, finally, we're going to make some money with this stuff, right? And I found what I thought was like the perfect advertiser, which was a company that made baby bottles, and a really well-known company that made baby bottles. In fact, I had used them with my kids, and that's why I was so passionate about it, because I knew, I don't know how much you or your audience knows about breastfeeding, but sometimes you have to use bottles. You got to kind of get through. Sometimes you're just not there with your baby, so even if you want to breastfeed, you got to use bottles at some point. And so having the right bottle could save a breastfeeding relationship, because if your kids kind of get it in their head that they're not going to breastfeed anymore, then you're done, right? And so I got this advertiser. I was so excited, because I was like living paycheck to pay, and it wasn't even a paycheck, right? But I was living sponsorship to sponsorship, trying to make all of this work at a time where, again, podcast advertising wasn't really there weren't a lot of people doing it at that time. And I found this advertiser. It worked out really, really well. But I had an expert that had been on my show previously, almost a year prior, that found out that I was working with a baby bottle company. And she was a very strict breastfeeding advocate, had written numerous books, and said that I needed to take down her episode if I was going to work with that company. And the thing is, she's very, very influential. So I knew if I would take down her episode, I would really be taking it down 40 or 50 episodes from other people that she would convince to take down their episode as well. So it was like a snowball effect, right? You do it for one person. How do you not do it for everybody? And I knew that going into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to stand my ground with this. And long story short, she actually sent me her attorney sent me papers, and they were going to sue me to take down this episode.
Wow.
And she gave really good information in this episode. But again, it wasn't just about her. It was about all of the episodes that were going to have to be taken down, all of that content that people were still, even though the episodes had been produced years prior, I still had moms reaching out to me saying, thank you for doing this. You saved my breastfeeding relationship with my child. I still had those emails coming in, even though the content had been released a while ago. So in my mind, I'm looking at this and I'm going, why am I doing this podcast? Okay. Because now we're getting into, I'm not making a lot of money with this anyway. Now I've got this person that wants to sue me because I'm finally bringing on an advertiser that they don't like. Right. And I had to have kind of a heart-to-heart conversation with myself to go, why are you doing this? And it was to help my community, right? It was to help other moms who had been in situations that I had found myself in the past, other moms had found themselves in the past, and to help them through what could be a very difficult time in life, depending on how you look at it, a very challenging time in life. And I thought, is taking down these episodes, what is that doing for my community? Again, still getting emails from people saying, I love this. Thank you so much. You saved me. And I thought, I have to fight this. I have to, So that was a very scary time in my life. We ended up resolving it where she didn't, she basically dropped the charges. But I saw like my family's income going up. And so I had these horrible visions of what could happen with this, and it, it was kind of a make or break moment. I thought, am I even really cut out for, having my own business? Because and then I really started looking at, well, how is my business? I think it was an LLC at the time. And I was like, can she sue me? And if she does sue me, is she just suing the business, or can she take my house? Like, I didn't know what this person was going to do. Right. Or how crazy they were going to get with it.
Yeah.
And here I am, like, recording in my garage, with my baby on my lap. I mean, I'm very grassroots. Seemed very unfair. I had a lot of thoughts of all that going through my head. But when I look back, that was an extremely challenging time, a very scary time. And it turned out okay. And I actually ended up meeting a lot of really cool people as a result. That, like, even I didn't even know there were podcast attorneys out there. Do you know there's people that specialize in this?
I did not know.
I did not either. Who really felt for me and were going to help me through this whole thing. And so there's some really lovely people out there, and so some not so lovely people out there. But yeah, when I look back, by far, it was such a scary time, but it gave me so much momentum moving forward. And then I was like rock solid on why I was doing what I was doing, who I was helping. And a lot of things fell into place for me. This was no longer just a podcast. Like, this was a stand for my audience, for women around the world that, needed to hear what we were talking about. It became much more personal at that point. So I know that was a long answer, but that's
an amazing story.
Oh, yeah, it was scary. It was scary, but it worked out in the end.
Yeah, and it sounds like it was a test, really, to see what you were made of. And
absolutely.
And I think that's what a lot of these challenges are. They're just tests to figure out how serious you are about whatever it is you're doing. Because as you mentioned, you came out of that stronger than ever, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I even gained a lot of respect from people too. That's not why I did it, right? I mean, really, I did it for my community, because I thought, oh my goodness, all of these episodes that have helped these women over the years, I'd have to take all of those down. I'm like, I can't, because the moment that it got out that one person wanted it down, because I started to get more and more emails from other people who were just following what she did because she's the leader of the pack, right? And I was like, I can't do this. Not only did I put so much effort into it, there were other people, other, guests that were, because each episode not only had the expert, but I had real life moms on the show that were struggling or going through whatever we were talking about. All those people volunteered their time. So what am I saying to all of them? Right?
Yeah, they're
I mean,
not
who
as
cares
important,
about,
right? Yeah.
yeah, who cares about like, oh, yeah, I spent a lot of time on it. I edited it. I did all of that. But like, it's more about the people that just did this out of the goodness of their heart.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a big moment.
So cancel culture has been around for a little longer than we thought.
Right?
But you beat it.
I guess
Good
so.
job.
Even in the breastfeeding space, guys, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Oh, but hey, and then on the other hand, I mean, that's the thing. It really does solidify your tribe as well, because the people that did end up sticking with you probably are more determined about sticking with you now too. They see who you are. They see your true colors, right?
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, our show is one of those that you're probably not going to listen past the time that you're breastfeeding your show. So we've got a lot of turnover with the show.
Yeah.
But I'd like to think that during that time, people are like, oh, wow. Because it sounds silly, but it kind of did make quite a bit of racket in the breastfeeding community. But I was like, and at the time it was crazy too, because I was breastfeeding twins at the time. And I'm like, I should be the poster child of who you are going, of who you support. And right now you're going after someone who is breastfeeding twins and just trying to make some money with a company that has saved my breastfeeding relationship with my children in the past. So it was crazy. It was crazy. Yeah.
It's messed up, really. All right. Well, because that leads us to the next thing, which is the band and the people that you have around you. Because it sounds to me like you probably have some good people around you. So tell me about how you assemble a team and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So at one point, for my parenting shows, when I launched the shows, there were 3 podcasts. And I knew that I didn't want to be the only host for the shows because that's boring. People don't want to listen to me that much. I might have some good stuff to say, but it's all about the community and getting other people involved. So from the very beginning, I had to find other people that would host shows and, sometimes produce shows. And what I did in the beginning is I found people who had been guests on other shows or, shows that I've been part of in the past that I thought would make a good fit. And I would invite them. I basically started this whole process of if you want to be a host on the show or be involved in shows, because I ended up launching more shows from there. But I used the model of come on one of our other shows and let's see how you do. Right. It was kind of like its own little audition. And I really couldn't guarantee I couldn't guarantee payment in the beginning. I really wanted to, but again, I'm, just trying to get sponsorships. I'm trying to make all of this. I'm the glue that's holding everything together, but I felt like I was twirling like a million different plates in the air at the same time. And I wasn't sure what was going to crash and when, right? So what I did in the beginning is I didn't promise people a specific payment. What I did is I said it would be a percentage of what was brought in every month through the sponsorships. And that worked for a really long time. It worked for over 2 years doing those podcasts. And at one point, let's see, we had at least a host and a producer for each show that was just doing it. So we would record once a month and we would record 4 episodes at a time so that we would space those out throughout the month. So it was basically a weekly podcast. But I had like 5 shows. I ended up with 5 shows, started with 3, ended up with 5, added a couple here and there as we kind of, we grew. But my teams have always developed very organically. I really feel like I like to, I guess that's promoting from within, if you want to look at it that way, right? It's like, oh, I've worked with you before, or you've been a guest on a show. When I found out I was pregnant with twins is when we launched our 4th show out of 5 and called Twin Talks. And because I thought, oh my goodness, we have to launch a new show. We don't have something about twins. I'm about to have twins. I got to learn on my own, right? I got to figure this out. And so she was another guest on, I think it was our pregnancy show. And I remember talking to her. She was pregnant with twins at the time. And so I reached out and she happened to be the running, I think it was like a local twins group. And she was like, oh yeah. And so she still does episodes. I mean, that was oh my goodness, like 7 or 8 years ago. And we still record episodes to this day. And that's how I found her.
Wow.
Was just, she was great on an episode, and we did it that way. For it later down the road, once we were making a little bit more money and regular income from advertising, I bit the bullet and I hired an editor. At that point, I had edited hundreds of podcast episodes, but I mean, I was trained in doing that. It was one of those things that you had to do. Like, I didn't really want to do it. There were other things I wanted to focus on, but I also didn't. I was very nervous about paying somebody to edit my podcast, because I was like, well, if they do a really bad job, it doesn't matter how good I did during the actual recording, right? Yeah. They could edit it and make me look horrible if they wanted to. They probably wouldn't be working for me very long after that. But that was a real fear of mine. So with that, I asked for referrals. I, was working with some other podcasts at the time. I said, do you have anyone editing your show? A lot of times they'll kind of give you a one-off just to kind of test and see if you like working with them. So I did that. Outsourcing my editing was probably one of the biggest decisions that I've had to make for the shows. It was also the smartest decision, was to let some of that go. Because again, it does free you up, as a, work from home person, you're the CEO, you're this, you're that, you're the marketing person, you're everything combined into one. And to let some of that go that was taking up a lot of time, and editing was taking up a lot of time, that was a really big deal. So that's how I found most of my team, is either through referrals or, I've already worked with them. So I've done a lot of coaching people. Like when I would bring up people, I mentioned like they were guests and I would bring them into a hosting position. Most of the time they didn't have any experience hosting. So there was a little bit of coaching that came with that, and, a little cheerleader, actually, you can do it. Come on. There wasn't necessarily a job posting for a lot of this stuff. It just happened naturally.
Hi, my name is Anik Malafon from Mastering Ascension, and I've been working with Tim Melanson and the Creative Crew Agency for a number of years now. Tim is my go-to guy for all things technology, and his team have helped me to really create the platform that I need that represents my brand, my message, and connects me directly to my ideal clients. What I particularly love about Tim is before he starts to dive into the technology, he always makes sure that he understands what your global view is, what your ultimate goals are. So then that way you're not wasting a lot of time back and forth switching around technology or platforms. He creates something from the get-go that is scalable, which is highly beneficial for any business. What I've experienced from Tim and his team is they're highly responsive. They are a wealth of information, and they're going to offer you the tools that you need to really make the mark that you want to make in the world. So that's my recommendation for Tim. He's awesome. You're going to love every minute. You won't regret it.
So we mentioned like money a few times in this, and cash flow. Yeah. And I'm wondering, can we talk a little bit more about, maybe even take us to the beginning? Like, so how did you make the decisions on what you should be spending money on and what you shouldn't be spending money on?
Well, I think in the beginning, it was spend as little money as possible, do as much sweat equity as you can, right? And then once we started to, bring on more sponsorship funding, that was more, or advertising, it was more about, okay, what are things that I really don't want to do that I'd really like to hand off to someone? But yeah, I mean, some stuff, in the very beginning, before sponsorship really kicked in, I had a credit card, and, I would put I'm not advocating for that per se, but that did get me through some times where there just wasn't any money. I just put it on a credit card, and thankfully things worked themselves. I try not to let it get out of hand, but if you've got to pay for certain things, and the advertiser hasn't sent in the check yet or whatever, which is still kind of a problem for podcasting. Sometimes advertisers don't send in checks for months. You can put 30-day, invoices all you want, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes you don't know when you're going to get your check. So it's a very real struggle. But I think just trying to limit what I needed, doing more on my own, finding people that would volunteer. Most of the stuff was kind of volunteer in the beginning. And then as money started to come in, it was, I'll give you a percentage of this. But we're talking, sometimes I was giving out $20 to someone a month. They were not getting rich off of this, right? But they also had a passion for it. And I think that's important too, right? I know we all need money to make things work right now, but at the same time, it does help when someone's really passionate about it and is getting more out of it than just the paycheck. So in my case, a lot of the people that worked on the show, in fact, I think all of them were experiencing some of the stuff that we were talking about on the show. So it was almost therapeutic. It was kind of like free therapy. Hey, come work on the podcast and air your grievances about parenting and pregnancy.
Yeah.
And it's much cheaper than having to pay a therapist. So
Yeah, you get $20.
Exactly. Exactly. You made $20 by telling us your problems. It works out great, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about, so that's about spending money. Now, what about any tips or tricks about how to actually, maybe make these people pay you more on time and stuff like that? Have you found any tricks?
Maybe not so much with getting people to pay you on time, although some of those, a lot of that is worked itself out with the ad agencies now. A lot of ad agencies are kind of the go-between, but I just had, believe it or not, this has not happened to me in years. We finished an ad campaign for an advertiser. There was an ad agency that was the go-between, but it's been months now, and the advertiser hasn't paid. I haven't had that happen in and you're talking about thousands of dollars, and I have not had that happen in a long time. So this is a very relevant discussion because I've got this ongoing thing. So I mentioned earlier about having multiple buckets of revenue. I think that that's really smart because then you're not just basing everything on advertising. So one of the things that we have done in the past, after launching all those podcasts, I eventually started my own podcast network because I had a lot of experience in this and I wanted to help other shows. And so one of the things that we have done, we've kind of played around with membership fees. I've also charged for communities in the past. Advertising obviously being one of them. I've sold different courses in the past. So I try to spread things out as much as possible because you never know. Well, COVID was a great example of this. When COVID first hit, all the advertising stopped. It was like, because they didn't know what to expect, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, like, can you imagine if all of your funding was just coming from advertising?
Yeah.
At least I had other things. Yeah, my revenue went way down for a bit, but at least I had other things to bring in money for the business. So that's the biggest thing I've learned is to diversify as much as possible. To try to think as many ways as you can of bringing in, funding, affiliate deals, things like that. Don't expect one thing to be your all with this because you just never know when something's really going to hit that market or whatever it is and it'll stop. And that's a really scary feeling when you own your own business.
Yeah, been there.
Right?
Yeah, it's one of those things. Yeah, you have to find as many different ways as possible to diversify, like even just different types of projects. And there's lots of different ways that you can offer the same service with different payment structures as well, too. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Absolutely. And different pricing models too. I've learned that too, done a lot of like, get them in the door with this. And then, there's the whole marketing side behind it, which I'm not crazy about, but, having different pricing models, I think is important too, because we're all coming from different backgrounds and needs and wants.
Yeah. And I think that people sort of like, I think gravitate towards one or the other. Like either they gravitate towards sort of like this recurring, like retainer income versus like the one-off projects,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I know I gravitate more towards the one-off projects. It's just, I like getting in, doing something cool and then leaving and doing something else.
Like, I'm done with that now.
Yeah. And you just keep on getting the like new exciting things. But what I found over the time is that what happens if you don't sell one this month? Or, what happens if something, next thing you know, now you're super desperate. Now you start to like offer crazy sales. And next thing you know, you're attracting the wrong clients. And now, it is a weird scenario where the less you charge for something, like lower than what it's actually worth, the worse the clients are. It's insane.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. It's the whole thing. Well, it costs more money, so it must be worth more. And you get sometimes better people, but sometimes not. I've had really poor clients that, I've coached for podcasting that have been high payers. And I'm like, oh, never again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you get someone in both those buckets, but definitely
Yeah.
it is useful to do the market research, figure out what you're supposed to be charging and charge somewhere around there, right?
Yes, exactly.
If you're too far up or too far down, you're going to probably end up into some weird troubles with people, either expecting too much because you're charging more, or expecting too much because you're charging too little. I find that weird, but they do.
Yes. Yep.
So you mentioned you're a coach, and I'm wondering,
Yeah.
like, what's your thought towards hiring coaches? Like, have you ever hired a coach? Like, what's your thoughts on all that?
Yeah. I mean, if you would have asked me this question maybe 9 months ago, my answer would have been much different. But 9 months ago, I hired my first business coach. And what happened was, I guess there's a little bit of what would you call it? Pride, maybe. I don't know. Like if you think about the people that are really good at things in life, most of them have coaches. Like you think of athletes have coaches, they kind of have to, right? But they have coaches. So why wouldn't someone in business need a coach? One of the things that I have realized in podcasting for as long as I have, just with podcasting, I noticed that sometimes when you're doing your own podcast, it feels really lonely, right? And that's one of the reasons I launched a podcast network, is because I was like, oh, I don't want all these shows to feel lonely. And then I got to the point where I was doing networks for a while. And then I launched a mentor group that was focused on people running podcast networks. So there's this theme in my life, I guess, of wanting to help people that, are kind of at the top and not really knowing what to do. But I recently, like I said, hired my own business coach, kind of went through that whole process. And it was one of those situations where I just been beating my head trying to figure out how to make certain business things work. And sometimes you're just so close to the project, you can't see past your mistakes that you've made, the frustrations that you've had in the past. You keep regurgitating the same ideas, expecting a different outcome. And that's the definition of insanity, right? And so that's kind of where I was with some parts of my business. And I was like, how do I break past this? And it wasn't even me that was like, I need to get a business coach. It was a friend of mine saw me banging my head basically against my keyboard, saying, you need a business coach. What do you think about bringing on someone? And at first it was like, oh, that means I can't do this on my own. But the truth was, I couldn't do it on my own. Like I was just in a rut. And you play, and then you get in these mental mind games, right? And so I needed like a clear and a clean slate. And I can't really say that I did a ton of research to find the perfect, coach out there for me. I do a lot of trusting my gut on stuff because I don't usually have a lot of time to do a lot of research. I try to do some, but when something feels good and I'm like, feel like I got a connection with someone in this case, which is one of the things I think you really need for a coaching, like if you're doing a one-on-one coach, you really have to feel like you connect with the person. That's all I did. And I did it in one afternoon. That's as much research as I did. And had a consulting call. I think that's important too, to kind of feel like, again, there's that rapport. You got to have that rapport, and you got to feel like when it comes to you getting coached on your business, I really feel like you have to not only have that rapport, but also feel comfortable sharing things with that person related to your business that may be uncomfortable. Like for me, like, I don't like to necessarily talk about like money a lot. Like, yes, we need it, blah, 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 blah. But like, it's not something that comes up in my day-to-day conversations. It's just what we need. Right. And so my business coach has forced me to kind of, we just got done with this really big audit that we just did, not just like line items and figuring out pennies and cents, not like that, but like looking at everything that I was doing for the business, really being honest with myself about what was working and what was not working. What was I fooling myself to think was working, but not really working, right? It was just hanging on strings. And I was really trying to preserve that for another reason, Right. And it really took going through this with her. A lot of it was internal work, but I also went through the stuff with her. And even it was great because even the stuff that I tried to, I didn't even realize I was trying to make excuses for why we should keep this one project or we should continue to do this. And she would call it out for what it is. So having that pair of eyeballs that is just like, going to be like not necessarily brutally honest, but just really question and just, get to the bottom of what's really going on here, I think is really, really important. So, that was my first experience having my own coach. But now that I reflect upon things, these mentor groups and things that I have created, these kind of, a lot of these groups that are related to podcasting. I mean, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to help people so they didn't feel like they were doing things alone. And what I needed to do, I should have hired my coach way sooner, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
It probably gave you a bit of a different perspective too about how it feels to be on the other side of the coaching relationship, right?
Yeah. Yeah. She gave me a lot of ideas too. I'm like, oh, that's how you do that. Well, that makes a lot more sense. In fact, I switched over, I just ended up switching over my whole like platform that I use for invoicing and scheduling and everything, because that's what she used. And she would send me invoices. I'm like, these are beautiful. This whole system you have is gorgeous. How do I replicate that? So you never know what you're going to learn. That was something I didn't even know that I needed. I didn't need to know, I didn't know that I needed to condense all of these programs into one that could do everything for me, that would create a lot less headache. And, I was spending a lot of extra money for multiple programs when one program did it all, right? Things like that.
Yep.
Sometimes the CEOs or entrepreneurs or whatever, we don't have an opportunity to like go back and really play CEO. We're so busy doing everything that, going back and really seeing how the company is run and, can we do ththings better? Are we wasting money? That gets pushed off to the side. But what you find a lot of times when working with a coach is they'll force you to go down those roads that, you have to make time for it or your business is going to suffer. You may not have a business if you don't take the time to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's because a lot of probably most businesses it's a passion. And it's something that you got into. You probably were super messy, getting it out the door and just kind of trying to make things work. And everything is the way it is because that's the best you could do at the time.
Yeah.
And we spend so much time defending ourselves. I don't know. I imagine I think things are getting more entrepreneurial now, but the longer ago you started your business, the less support you probably had from your friends and family about quitting the cubicle job and going and starting this little thing, right? And so you're always defending. No, it's good. No, it's good. It's good. And then when you get to talk to a coach, they're basically making you kind of like, no. I don't want the answer that you give to everybody else.
Yeah.
I want the real answer because we're not going to be able to fix these problems unless you actually face up to them, right?
Yeah. And I remember you just brought back a memory for me when I first launched my parenting shows and I was trying to find sponsorship and I was recording every weekend and my husband would see me like going through all of this and he's like, I admire the fact that you're trying to do this. It's not bringing in money and I see you working yourself to death here. Like he didn't see what I saw, the potential. And again, this is way back. He's like podcasting isn't going to go anywhere. And so now when like, it's so funny. He does this to me all the time. He'll like on TV, they'll be like, oh, we also have a podcast. And he always looks at me because he's like, oh my God, I totally underestimated what you were doing back then because he just thought I was just it was just crazy. Why is she working herself to death for this thing that's never going to take off and no one's ever going to know what a podcast is? It's this weird new thing, right? And now and now what celebrities have podcasts and stuff now. So it's commonplace.
You're ahead of the curve.
I guess. Yeah. I'm just crazy enough to do it before other people.
Well done. Well, okay. So it's time for your guest solo. So tell me what's exciting in your business then.
Oh my goodness. So we're branching out and we're doing some different things. I always tell people in podcasting, when you're working in any kind of new space, whether it's crypto or whatever you're working in, if things are constantly changing, my biggest piece of advice for people is to roll with the punches. And what I mean by that, and I'm not a big boxing fan, but I do know that if someone's coming at you with a punch, you go with the punch and not against it. Okay. So I have adopted this mentality into how I do my business. And when you're in podcasting right now, it's a very fluid kind of industry. There's a lot of things still trying to be figured out. And so I always tell people when, like if I'm bringing on, I just brought on a virtual assistant a few months ago as well. That was a recommendation from my podcast coach. Or not podcast coach, but my coach who, is coaching me on my podcast business. Yep. So yeah, for me, it is all about trying new things, seeing what works, keep the stuff that does work, throw out the stuff that doesn't, right? That's what I call rolling with the punches. So one of the things that's new that is actually going to be debuting about the time this episode is coming out, and it kind of has a funny story to go along with it, is I'm a new podcast coach for Kajabi University. So if you guys are familiar with Kajabi, it's I don't know, I think they have about 60,000 businesses that use their software, but it can do everything from, launching a website for you, doing courses, sending marketing emails, lead pages, all of that kind of stuff. Communities as well. It's everything wrapped up into one. So you pay one fee and you get all this stuff. Well, quick story about that. I ended up doing a course for them that is being released in February, and it is a how-to podcast course because they started to add podcasting, like podcast hosting, to their platform. So you could create a podcast and use Kajabi to host your podcast. Well, the story behind it is this. I was using it for other things. I log in one day to Kajabi and I see podcast new, which of course is going to catch my attention, right? And I'm like, what is this? So, do a couple clicks, find out that they've now got some, hosting information up there for podcasts. But there's no information about how to podcast. So I felt that there was a gap. It was like, great, you can host a podcast. What's a podcast? How do you do this? The whole thing. So what I did, because I'm not scared of doing this, I've done this multiple times in my life. Like, I don't look at the odds of something. If I have a urge to do something, I'm just like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'm just going to put myself out there. I get denied. So I reached out through their customer support, like their chat or whatever. And I said, hey, I'm a podcast coach. I see that and I use Kajabi. I see that you are now hosting podcasts, but you don't have any information on this. I even have a podcast course and it's hosted on Kajabi. Like, is there anything we can do? Can we work together at all? So I got nowhere with that. And I thought, well, how can I, because I still felt like I needed to talk to these people somehow. So I go on LinkedIn and I'm searching for people that work at Kajabi. Someone pops up who's a new employee, but is in somehow the marketing department. I can't remember his title, but he was like new. He was there for like 2 months. And I thought, oh, he's still excited about his job. He hasn't gotten in trouble for giving out too many people's information yet. So maybe I can go through LinkedIn and, tell him my ideas. So I did on a whim, never thought I would hear back. He emailed me back pretty quickly through LinkedIn and he said, here's who you need to talk to. Let me do an email introduction. And that was their, someone in charge of education, right? Which Kajabi University, they do a whole bunch of different courses for free for their users. So it made sense. So we went back and forth and she's like, oh my gosh, we were looking for someone just like you. We just hadn't found them yet. I was like, here I am. Well, so that's exciting. It's been in production for a while. We shot it a while ago, actually. But it's been in production for a while. It's coming out in February of 2023. And so that's what I would say that's kind of the big exciting thing. Obviously, I'm using this as a way for people to find out more about our network and what we do. And the fact that it's free is really nice. Kajabi mainly works with like entrepreneurs and coaches and things like that, which is the type of people that I prefer to work with for podcasting. And so I think it's a good opportunity for that. I'm excited to see what happens. I'm also trying not to get my hopes up because you know how sometimes this stuff goes. It's like, you get so excited and it's like 5 people reach out to you afterward. But I have things set up. So hopefully it's a great funnel for the future. So that's a really big thing. The other thing is I do have a podcast that teaches people how to podcast, specifically if you're interested in podcasting for your business. So if you want to take your business knowledge and everything and create a podcast out of that because you love what you do, it's a great podcast. It's called Podcast Your Business, because I was really specific with keywords on that. And you can find it in any of your, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any player you'd like. And so that's a weekly show. And that's, another way they can learn more about me and get some great podcasting tips.
Love it. Right on. Cool. So what is it? Podcast Your Business, you said?
Yeah. Podcast Your Business is the name of the podcast. It's everywhere, right? So just kind of type it in whatever player you want. Independent Podcast Network is the name of our network, and it's independentpodcast.network. That's the URL. So any of those free resources that I was telling you guys about that we just give away because we love creating content, that's all on the website. And then if you are at a stage, like if you guys have a podcast and you are at a stage where you're thinking about advertising, we have a section on advertising. We'd love to be able to help you with that as well.
Awesome. So much fun rocking out with you today, Sunny. This has been a good time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim.
Awesome. And to the listeners, make sure you subscribe, rate, and comment. We'll see you next time with the Work at Home Rockstar podcast.